I'll kind of give a preview of where we are with the plan. Unfortunately, Marin is under the weather this evening, so she couldn't be here tonight. Um, so I'm here supporting the Great Seneca Plan, as is Steve and Alex and Ben Kraft, and we'll kind of do some introductions. Um, so just to give you a sense of where we are and what we're kind of here to do tonight, I think that through the course of our work on the plan with you all, we've talked at a few occasions about the life sciences and real estate compatibility study that was being done to help inform the recommendations of the plan. And that study is now complete. And the study was presented by our consultants, EcoConsult Inc. out of Philadelphia, to the planning board last Thursday. And I shared an email with you all on Friday that included a link to the study as well as to the planning board briefing. And Ben Kraft worked with our consultant directly on that study and is here tonight to go over the study and the findings with you all. And we also talked about transportation analysis and how the analysis that was being completed would inform the recommendations. And, we wanted to make sure that we came back to you all to talk both about the life sciences study and the transportation analysis, based on the conversations that we've had to date in the development of the plan. Um, where we are with the plan is that we posted what's called the working draft of the plan last Friday. That is sort of staff's, um, first draft of the plan that we share with the planning board. And we will be presenting that draft plan to the planning board this Thursday. We're scheduled to present right after lunch, so sort of early afternoon. And what our ask to the planning board is at that time is to accept the working draft of the plan as the public hearing draft and to schedule a public hearing. Typically, we schedule the public hearing 30 to 45 days after the planning board briefing on the working draft to make sure that we give enough time for public notice. And so we're anticipating, if the planning board does accept the working draft as the public hearing draft, that a public hearing would occur in mid-March. We'd want to make sure that we keep you all informed of that because you've been such, important stakeholders in this process to date. And so we'll certainly, keep you informed and up to date on the action that the planning board takes on Thursday. And if they do schedule a public hearing, the details related to that. If you're interested in listening to the presentation this week, it is something that you can watch either live online or on demand. And also happy to share that link with you all so that you have the information available. So, unless there are any initial questions, perhaps I can turn things over to Ben to take us through the life sciences and real estate compatibility study.
Yeah, well, feel free to interrupt and if there was a question, but otherwise I will share my screen and get started with this. So I'm glad to be able to share study with you all and get into slideshow show. So yeah, this as Jessica said, this it's just been completed and last week was presented by the consultants to the planning board, and I think it was pretty well received. I have a feeling some of you probably, I think some people on this call probably know the life science industry even better than we do with in terms of development and actually how it works. But so I'm just going to give a pretty brief overview. It's a huge study. The presentation was pretty long, so I'm just going to really give a really quick overview. Obviously, the full presentation can be accessed. You can just go view it, or you can read the full report at your leisure. There's a lot of information in there, so I'm just going to cover really some of the basics. So this full overview isn't. I won't get to all of this, but we'll kind of go touch briefly onto most of it. Um, a little bit of the background for the why we've done this study, our motivations for it was that, and I can hear things if somebody I'm not seeing the question. So Jessica, feel free if somebody's asked a question in the middle of it. I mean, anyone feel free to interrupt me, or or if I don't see the question, feel free to just jump in and be like, Ben, there's a question. But to get back to why we did this, well, I think some of it, most of this group is probably aware of that we really are trying, or the Great Seneca Plan, this update is looking at trying to make this the Life Science Center, especially, a more vibrant live, work, play type of place. And so, and this is both for competitiveness reasons, because this is really turns out what all of the globally competitive life science districts in our country are doing, and also just because we need to. We don't have the land anymore. We really need to definitely need to add housing here. And if you're going to add housing, you kind of need to add everything else that goes along with that, so that it becomes a place that people can not only can live in, but want to live in. So we really needed. So what we didn't need here was a one of those general, like, what do you need to be competitive in life science studies. We've the county has done those. We kind of know where we stand in that. What we needed was much more specific about the life science needs, or the specific real estate and development needs, and how our county's current framework is either supports or doesn't support those, and what we might need to do to change with, like, zoning and regulations. And then we also got them to talk, to do these case studies about what other places are doing. And I will say this was a great consultant, and I think in some ways went above and beyond what we even asked them, because they kind of got into more of the, I guess what you call, like, the soft infrastructure of life science competitiveness, which I'll talk about a little bit. One of the things that was really, this was a bit of research that we did for just to support this. And what was really interesting is that I think we all kind of knew that the Life Science Center is really the premier hub for private life sciences activity in the county. But I did not realize until I, like, made this map and just, like, crunched the data, how, really how dominant it really is in the county. I mean, this is just kind of like a heat map, and you can just really see that right in the Life Science Center, with a little bit of it extending into Gaithersburg and Rockville. But it really is the epicenter of, obviously not the federal labs. They're kind of separate, and we just haven't seen much private industry develop around them. But for the private industry itself, it's really the epicenter of that is in the Life Science Center. So it really kind of reinforces this idea that we need to, like, update and modernize this area. It really has a lot of potential. So again, I kind of told you what the scope of work is, really the specific real estate needs. To be honest, the understanding of the specific types of life science businesses, that first bullet there, we actually kind of wanted that. It turned out that I think the data just is not good enough to, like, describe exactly what our, like, niche in the life science business, or if there is any, or which exact is it cell and gene therapies, or like biomanufacturing. I don't even really know all the full different types of sub specialties, but it turned out to be too hard to do that with the data. So we kind of went in some other directions. But then we, specific real estate needs, evaluating the compatibility of life sciences with housing and small scale commercial development, and then to just come up with a set of recommendations that would help us to continue to support the life science industry in kind of like a 21st century trajectory. So won't spend too much time on the life science market overview, but in life science, real estate is a little bit unique, I guess, for as far as commercial real estate goes, because it really can have, and sometimes it's not even, sometimes it's more considered industrial, sometimes it's kind of considered office. It's never exactly clear, but it can, the same building could have an R&D labs. It could have office space, conventional office spaces too, and it could also have even some manufacturing in it. And biomanufacturing, the kind of that manufacturing that not making aspirin, but making a lot of the biologic medications. We do obviously have that. We have some of that in the county, and it's a little bit more compatible with the type of development that maybe we want than a giant more traditional type of manufacturing plant. And then, but all of this is makes up the life science industry and is all kind of fair game for what we want to think about in the life science center. The the national trends in life sciences is that it's really growing. It is up until about 2022 ish when interest rates really shot up, that which kind of cooled off on a lot of I think high tech industries just because of the investment. It went just it could keep up the pace that it had been on. But the life science industry, even before the pandemic, but especially since the pandemic, has really gotten a lot of investment, grown, got added a lot of jobs. It's a very high value industry, and it continues to grow. Um, so it's definitely one of the it's as we move to Montgomery County, the to be I guess kind of really blunt about it, it's one of the few really bright spots in the county's economy. We have not grown jobs or grown or been able to establish many new businesses for a while in the county, but the life science industry has really been growing, and especially the part of the life science industry that is right in the life science center has really just been outpacing the county by quite a bit in job growth. So, it's I think again that's something that people recognize in the county. It's one of our main competitive industries that we rely on, and do we have a good talent pipeline? I'll talk a little bit about that later. It's not exactly the same as kind of talent pipeline that other places have, and we've got some new development coming online, and we still got pretty low vacancy rates in life science real estate. Um, the challenges, though, are that we do have fairly high costs. Again, I think one of the things we really hoped we could get with this report is something like, well, how are our costs in our development processes? Where do we compare to Boston or the Bay Area or North Carolina or something? And again, I just don't think that kind of knowledge resides in like real estate brokers' minds and on their own spreadsheets. And I just kind of think that's the kind of stuff that you can't really get great comparisons on, in a very formal way like this report. But we did get got some pretty good data on just the costs generally that we would expect. We have not had a lot of, given the I guess demand and how the industry's going, we've had modest supply coming in, that's been built and that's in the pipeline. We don't really get a lot of spec development here. The places really kind of like the top tier, Boston and the Bay Area will get their spec development. That is the development for just building a life science lab and hoping that and then hoping you'll be able to lease it out to somebody in the future. Just kind of that's a much riskier type of development. Most of what we get is where a developer comes in for a specific client to build a specific space. So we don't really have that kind of that spec building. And then of course the competition. It's there's a lot of global competition. We're competing with people. We're competing with Philadelphia. We're competing to some extent. We're competing with people within the region, although not so much. The Montgomery County is kind of still the main hub, but you still have to make sure you can maintain that standing within the region. And it's an international industry. We also don't have a great amount of small scale R&D space. From what we can tell, our incubators are fairly full, and people actually have trouble leaving them because then once you kind of scale up there, we just don't have that kind of space that's available for firms, life science firms that have like graduated from that very beginning phase into that kind of just starting to scale up space or phase. Now, what we have heard since then is, and again, this is just pretty anecdotal. I don't have good data, but that now that the market's cooled a little bit, that some of that, a little bit of space may be starting to open up for the smaller scale um, uh, life science company in an earlier stage. But still, that's kind of, it seems like that's kind of hard to get a really good grasp on. And it does seem like, in general, even though there will be fluctuations, it's really that smaller scale space that is really, it's really tough to supply. It's risky on the development side. So it just we kind of have or may have a perpetual shortage of that. Um, the so life sciences development is obviously, because of the special infrastructure that is needed for an R&D lab, you're at 2 to 3 times the cost of just conventional office. So these are much more expensive and much riskier proposals for developers. They also hopefully, especially at this point, have a higher payoff because we're just not seeing conventional office development at all. What we've got is more of a vacant office problem, just like everywhere else. So one of the things that is extra good about the life science industry is just this idea that it's still a very high value, high tech, innovative industry that actually still requires people to be physically present. That is a great give in this hybrid or remote work era. For a place to have that requires people to be there is definitely a bonus and an advantage to having life science specialization in your region. So they kind of took a look at the consultant from their perspective, what we have as a county that is kind of our selling points. If you're a site selector, if you're kind of one of those people that's like going out and saying, hey, this is a good place for you to build your next facility. And this is really kind of more in comparison to some of the other leading life science hubs. We have decent transportation, although, we're, especially in the life science center, we don't have rail there at the moment. And we have, in certain places in the county, we have good bike and pedestrian infrastructure. That's certainly going to factor into, I don't know exactly what the transportation will be on the menu tonight, but obviously in the plan in general, the bike and pedestrian aspect of that will factor in pretty heavily. Site availability, they kind of said, well, we have a lot of land countywide, with the recognition that that land is mostly kind of off limits. A lot of it's the ag reserve. So we're really kind of in this space where a lot of places are, that there just isn't a lot of land left. Even some of the places like North Carolina, they still have a lot more land than we do, but they're going to approach the limits of where they have like large sites available too. So we're at the point where we need to think about infill. We just can't, create a whole life science campus out of thin air. We have, as far as housing goes, where it says relatively affordable here, that, obviously might sound like not true, but when we're looking at Montgomery County up against the other really prominent life science centers, like especially Boston and Silicon Valley, like, yeah, we're actually kind of affordable compared to them. We do not, and we're, even like places like Philadelphia and North Carolina, some of our other, I guess, quote unquote competition are not that far off in terms of home prices from us. So depending on who you're kind of measuring against, it's really not necessarily that much of a disadvantage. Although, just like a lot of these places, just like about everywhere, right now we are not, we have a housing supply problem. That's something that this plan is really trying to address. Land use policies, the plan again is going to get into this, but we just don't have our life science center zone had not been designed to really accommodate such or the levels of, I wouldn't even say high levels, but there's just the levels of mixed use that we're hoping we can create here. So we had them look at like, what should we do to given our zoning and our regulatory environment to really what do we need to change to encourage that. Human capital, we've got a lot of life science, uh, really a lot of life science talent here in skill. A lot of it's though in our federal labs, which can be really good. Sometimes we have like the most well renowned expert in the field, in the world. But we also have we have a lot of administrators and people who maybe just aren't necessarily either in temperament or just like kind of stage of life and career entrepreneurial that just comes with federal agencies. So that's been kind of a long-standing problem with our life science. And not to say we don't have that, because we certainly do. We just don't have that to the same degree that some of the places that we can compete with have it. Our institutional ecosystem, the big glaring thing that we don't have is the university, which just about all the other places we're looking at have a lot of have one or several really well known world class research institutions that really generates a lot of what they have, and that's just been something that it's not coming anytime soon. So that's just something we have to deal with our life science uh, ecosystem. But we have fairly modern physical infrastructure, and that is really the power, reliable, redundant access to like power and a lot of sewer capacity is actually really important. But so it is, at least in the large sense, we have a fairly modern infrastructure that can handle a lot of that. So looking at development typologies, they really kind of went through and broke into they I guess came up with about these six categories of like typologies of how your life science district could look. And I think for us, like probably the first two, the infill housing development near existing life sciences and the mixed use infill development are kind of going to be, I think, the ones that guide this plan the most. One of the things I actually don't think I mentioned, because this is this is kind of the Great Seneca, the IAC. We do, this study was kind of done for the Great Seneca plan in one sense, but we also want it to be a guide for any other life science development, in the future in the county. So that's something I'm usually, careful to say with different groups, but it's not supposed to be. It's more of just a general study. It just so happens that this was a great opportunity to do a study like this, and this plan is going to be like the kind of first main place we put it to the test, and rightly so, since it's the most important and most prominent life science center in the county. But so back to where I guess I was there before I went on that tangent. The infill housing development and the mixed use infill development are probably a lot of what we will see hopefully at the life science center. But vertical mixed use certainly could have a place if that can be if it becomes feasible. And mixed use redevelopment, I think that's similar to the others, but I think this is more looking, like in this picture, like can you do with a strip mall? We probably don't have the land for a master planned mixed use district, like an entire, very large set of land. Like the example for this is Philadelphia's Navy Yard, which we just, we don't have that large piece of land coming available. And same with master plan greenfield development. And the Philadelphia one was a redevelopment, or greenfield. This would be obviously just wholly new development, like this Holly Springs in North Carolina. We're just probably not going to be looking at that. But I think at least the Navy Yard does give us some examples of like what ultimately the scale of development can look like, or once it's actually done, regardless of how it started, what a nice mixed use life science district can look like. And so here's just I'm not going to go too far into these, because you kind of really have to you read it and look at whatever other images are in the report. But it's just kind of going through the details of what some of these developments are like. And so this University City district is the consultant they're based in Philadelphia. They have a lot of experience in Philadelphia, so it's kind of a Philadelphia heavy report. But I think that's actually not a bad thing because they are a very close. They're very similar to us in terms of like the size of their life science industry, and some of the things that their problems that they're facing. Although they're a lot of what they're looking at where their development is still much more urban. It's like in the city of Philadelphia. So they've added 3,500 units of infill housing in the University City District, which has really grown up into like a pretty diverse mixed use district that also is really strong in life science. And they have, a place making. They have a place which we'll talk about. It's like an innovation district that really helps organize all of uh, the placemaking activities and the development that goes along there. Um, the Kendall Square, or sorry, this I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a mixed-use life science lab and housing in Lower Roxbury in Boston. So this isn't really there. Kendall Square is the one everyone talks about, that we talk about a lot, which is a very dense mixed-use life science place, a life science center in Cambridge, which is kind of like the probably something that's going to be hard for us to reach in density, but is a really great thing to shoot for. This is just another development that again shows, I think, some of the potential for like what could happen in the life science center if we can do add some of the or make implement some of the recommendations that they're doing to really enable this type of development. So I'm not, I think, going to go through. I'll just kind of skip through the rest to give you a taste of what's there. And again, I think it's probably better just to, read through the report and kind of. I'm not sure me just kind of describing the places is all that effective. So, from to sum it up, from the land use implications are, I guess, from site selection perspective, we've got a lot of there are a lot of good points that we have pretty good transportation infrastructure, obviously a well-educated workforce, and then there are the major research institutions nearby. The they actually went, I guess, again, I think it's even a little bit beyond scope, and I'll talk about some of the recommendations to build connections between regional research institutions and other regional life science districts. Um, the We are one of the good things, I guess, where we are here is that like a lot of places, some places like in Boston are a bit ahead of us here, but a lot of places like in North Carolina really are still in the middle of doing what we're doing, which is this shift to a much more dense or mixed use type of life science district. So the even like the Research Triangle in North Carolina really is going pretty, going, I guess, full steam ahead at the same thing, even though they're traditionally they're a very low density suburban type of life science district. They're recognizing the need also that they need to kind of, add a lot of infill and create a different kind of place. So the development is less driven by surrounding land use than market conditions, built environment and infrastructure. So again, they're just the point of this is just to say it doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, we can control the land use and even what's there. That can be you know if it's not the perfect type of urban or suburban setting or whatever they want. What's more important to life science development is going to be the what you can do with the parcels and the development that you have, and will the market support it, which in a lot of cases ours will, and the kind of like just the physical infrastructure that like the power, the water, that you have there. Finally, there is not a one size fits all approach to life sciences development. All the districts and all these places are different, have their own advantages and disadvantages. You can be you can be lower density, you can be higher density, and you can be mixed use, and these things are all compatible with life sciences. And then we'll talk a little bit about this, but to really, I guess, make the life science, make these investments, maximize the investments, like the built environment investments. You really need like an intentional district or community-wide approach. This usually comes in the form of an innovation district, which I'll talk about briefly. That really like puts all the ingredients of mixed use together and does placemaking and can, these kind of districts can do all kinds of things, not limited to development and placemaking. Um, so, and just as I guess that's leading into this next, um, idea here, where what the consultant did was really look at a lot of organizations that really are under this model of innovation district. So that's just what they do. They're kind of like they're just organizations. A lot of times nonprofits. A lot of times they're a wing of like the major university that really just lead. They can do things. They can do development. They can do infrastructure. They can do placemaking. Some of them have like even have workforce development component. Um, they are the people, the groups that kind of they can even do like kind of networking events. They're the groups that kind of bring all this together. And there's like as I'll get into here soon, there's really no one model for it. So they gave us plenty of in the appendix. It's just like there's a lot of case studies that are very descriptive and full of information about how these different innovation districts work, and then ultimately how we might want to think about that if we want to think about some sort of innovation district for our life science center. So there's kind of the case studies have to do with both the organizational structures of the innovation districts and land use considerations. So those are like the thematic areas of the case studies. And so for some of the innovation districts like Research Triangle Park, they have a case where they're in both thematic areas. There's two separate case studies, and one talks about their organizational structure, one talks about land use considerations. Whereas like University City District only has organizational structures. They don't talk about land use considerations. So that's what this chart is for, just to show that there's kind of like, I think there's like 7 districts overall, but then there's there's I think 10 actual case studies depending on the thematic area. So again, I think it's probably that's a better one to kind of go through at one's leisure for what they want to get out of it. So to kind of sum it all up, challenges, complexities of infill mixed use development, which is complex. And I actually didn't get too much into the challenges of that, but that will get to when I talk about the recommendations. Same with the limited tools, that we don't really have the tools to influence the use and form of life sciences development. Lack of zoning flexibility, again, that'll come up in a second with the recommendations. Not great connectivity. These are kind of single-use suburban areas that are, cut off by large roads. Again, like that's, that I think that kind of place might have been marketable in the past. It's switching to the traditional like 80s style office park is not necessarily the way, the thing that life science companies are looking for anymore. Lack of funding mechanisms to support place-based investment. This relates to the idea of the innovation district. We're kind of depends on how you think of it. Well, we're going to talk about a business improvement district, which can be the same thing as an innovation district, but or they could also be separate. But I tend to think of them as kind of one and the same thing, just a way to actually get revenue and support some of these investments. And a lack of strategically aligned resources to support the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Again, this is kind of like not necessarily that it's specifically development related thing that they looked at, but just how we do have kind of a fractured and really I would say almost in a sense like non-existent entrepreneurial ecosystem, where we don't have like kind of the cohesiveness that some of the other places do. So overall, the 4 areas of recommendations are to expand and create new development practices and standards to encourage the creation of intensive mixed-use life sciences districts. 2, to create value capture tools and encourage development investments in the public realm. And the value capture, this is like things like the business industrial or business improvement district. 3, focus on place-based investments in and around life science clusters, and that would be where the innovation district comes in to do that. And then 4, grow an entrepreneurial ecosystem. And just so to get to the again, I hinted at some of the specific recommendations, but the so for the development practices and standards, um, they recommended optimizing the existing life science center zone to ease restrictions on residential, retail, and other non-life science uses, and also to explore creating a new zoning overlay specific to life science mixed use development. That's probably where we're going to be headed because for a lot of reasons, just not wanting to necessarily do a zoning text amendment with the existing life science center zone, but just kind of see how it's different, a different overlay could work to really um, uh, to add, the life science center zone, the way as it is, doesn't allow the density of uses that we think would be necessary to do all the things that we've mentioned in this report. It just doesn't allow enough residential and retail within life sciences. So that's kind of what we're thinking about amending with an overlay zone. And again, that would all help to encourage higher densities in commercial nodes. Um, the So a lot of this is about it's just more continued on these kind of like just these are not exactly like with the regulations, but just doing more kind of in the background to things like have requests for proposals for county-owned land. Just be a little bit more. One place like Boston has specific communities that that are like it's certified in a way to they have a certain set of criteria where they are like they're called bio ready. So some of them have like a specific life science development liaison within their office that can help speed up life science projects. I think a lot of it is just having people on staff that are really just familiar with the different requirements of life sciences as opposed to conventional office development. Really, I think really helps uh, the projects move faster and smoother. Um, Value capture tools, again, this is the business improvement district, which we will try to explore with the plan. And this would be just, again, it's a way of getting revenue for really targeted infrastructure and placemaking improvements that could enhance the overall appeal of the place. They recommended that is the consultant recommended tax increment financing, which hasn't really been used, I think, at all in the county. It's not really popular, and so it was their recommendation. We kind of left that in as food for thought. But we think probably the business improvement district has the best potential to work in the life science center. Um, and then for place-based investments, we're calling this is the catch-all term of a place management organization is what they recommended. And really that can be one and the same as the innovation district. It's just the place management organization is the kind of larger term for what an innovation district essentially is. And that could also just as easily be a business improvement district. It just kind of depends on what they call themselves and the functions that they do. None of all these things are kind of interchangeable. But what this organization could do is make the placemaking and streetscaping improvements. Coordinate these improvements so it's not kind of just like as what willy-nilly as somebody gets an idea or whenever one development happens, you get to do one thing and then you wait for the next development to do the next. Just a way to coordinate all this and kind of have a vision for the area. And actually, I shouldn't say that the plan will have a good vision for the area, but this is more of an implementation tool to make sure that that vision gets realized. And so the entrepreneurial ecosystem, these again, this is more of just kind of like thinking about how we can get more of like a community, make the life science uh, industry within the county a bit more of a community. So it involves just kind of bringing people together and creating, more incubator type space and programs. So kind of moving away from the land use part of it there, which they kind of went above and beyond to do that. So yeah, that I feel like I kind of had to talk. It was maybe a little longer than I planned, so I hope that's not ruining the rest of the night. But there's just so much in here that it's hard to get through quickly. So I think I can stop and take questions at this point, or or just, I guess, turn it right over to transportation, whatever direction people want to go.
Hi, Ben. I'm Sandy Young with, I actually work with CBRE in my day job when I'm when I'm not here on the committee. And I just wanted to thank you. This was really insightful and I think a really great study. One thing that we've noticed in working in the life sciences real estate world is that, yes, the ecosystem that you speak to is definitely needed to be looked at here in Montgomery County to improve it. And I think one thing that is missing in the ecosystem is that startup incubator space.
Mm-hmm.
I think the one challenge that we've seen is, how do you get developers to want to build those spaces? They're kind of a lost leader. They're always looking for the large tenant to move into a space. In fact, there's a number of developments that are currently on hold in the area because they can't find that, anchor tenant to move in.
Yeah.
But I fully agree with a lot that's in here, and I really appreciate you going through this. It's great.
Great, thanks. Yeah, the startup, either the incubator or the small scale like lab space for an early stage company, that does, I will say, tend to be one of the trickiest things to think about here, because it's, we've thought a lot about that, and it's kind of one of those things. Well, we want to encourage it, but we also, it's kind of like, well, how, what mechanism can you use to encourage it? And it's, we're kind of reluctant to recommend certain, I mean, incubators, I guess I know we have a couple of them, and they're, that is publicly funded. So how much more appetite is there for more of that, or how much more resources are there? So it's kind of just that question of like, do you really, yeah, I mean, it's a really sticky thing. And to be honest, I'm not sure we fully figured that out. But I think we definitely echo your concern. And maybe that's just something that I think what we're hoping is that through this idea of like, if we can, get something like an innovation district, that maybe that's the kind of the glue or something, the catalyst that will hopefully get a lot more of these kind of ideas going and implemented.
Yeah, I definitely think it's an interesting thing to look further into. Like, how did those other areas, Boston, these other areas you spoke of, like, how did they bring in those incubator spaces? And like, I know J Labs is nearby. There's one down in DC at the Children's National Research Institute space. But yeah, like, how do you create a space to maybe bring in another institution or group that, kind of focuses solely on that to help be a catalyst for others. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a really critical part of the ecosystem that absolutely this area needs to look into.
Great. Hopefully we'll get some more momentum on that. I think Phil has his hand raised.
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to, another question. I know it was mentioned several times in here, the idea that, one of the key concerns is the limitations of the LSC in terms of enabling mixed use, a higher level of mixed use density development in the life sciences center. And I'm kind of scratching my head a little bit about that a little bit, because honestly, in the 10 plus years that I've been involved in the GSSC process, one of the things we haven't talked a whole lot about is a market demand or developer demand to implement that kind of mixed, high density mixed use. And so, I mean, I agree that I generally am in, favorable towards mixed use, applications, but, I mean, we have plenty of a fair bit of infill development that's already happened, and most of it is not, and in fact, most of the developers have actively shied away from any retail, application. And, it generally hasn't been, there hasn't been a lot, seemed to be a lot of demand for true, any kind of even mixed use of commercial and residential, that as we've been talking for the past 10 years here. So, while generally, we've talked a little about the LSC overlay and how that could loosen up and create opportunities. Where's the market demand, I guess, or where are we, are we really seeing a pressing need for this driven by development at this point in time?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think part of part of me wonders whether the ingredient of housing, which by really I guess kickstarting that, because once you have more housing, then you have the actual reason to have the retail and all this. Not that offices still have they generate customers, I guess, for retail, but once you kind of really get the housing in there, which I think is one of the biggest limitations of the LSC, I think that that's the thinking, is that is what will be the catalyst for, or the rationale for there being more demand for retail, which will lead to the development of retail. Again, I take your point. Like, there just hasn't been, even if we do that, that doesn't guarantee that there's going to be the interest in retail. So I think a couple of things, again, not to lean too much on this idea of the innovation district, because it's not, none of this is, it's a plan, it's an idea. We don't know if that'll actually happen, but something like that could be the advocate, and could really work with developers to bring new retail. And we do see that happening in business improvement districts all over the place. I mean, that's kind of one of their main functions, is to kind of grease the wheels and get development like that to happen. So I do think that's probably part of it. But and then I think just what the report shows is that at least across the country in all these places, there has been interest in doing retail, and maybe we're not at the right density yet. Maybe we just don't have the right characteristics, but there has been interest in, at least in other similar places with similar life science districts, to actually bring more retail in. So
yeah. Well, I guess, Ben, on related to that though, I guess I'm also though, I mean, we of the development that we have had in the LSC, we've had a couple of commercial to residential conversions, right? 2 or 3, I think it is, of pretty high density stuff relatively. We've had the the PSTA, right, which is pretty moderate density residential. So again, I'm still and then and I mean, they're not true mixed uses, but they are pretty close proximity and adjacencies to and in the PSTA, quite a large decent sized parcel, right, adjacent to the commercial developments of Alexandria and others. And again, we don't have, Alexandria hasn't seemed like it's been, and Alexandria is right next to Treville Gateway, right? I mean, which is, so again, I'm wondering, and the last thing I'd say is, like, Bellward has explicit limitations on its ability to develop, right? So where are we going to put, I'm just looking for where we're going to put this, this mixed use kind of density. I mean, yeah, there's some opportunity for infill in the existing office parks, and but that's spoken for space that the developers would need to take an active interest in redevelopment, which is a little bit different than infill opportunities. I just, again, I'm trying to visualize where in the LSSC we actually have the opportunity to do anything on this recommendation, and where it's not being done to a certain extent already.
Ben, maybe I can chime in too. I think, Phil, you're raising really good points, and I think that this is where kind of the study and the master plan kind of go hand in hand, because what we're trying to do with the master plan is sort of think about, how can we address some of the challenges that Ben, kind of like listed a couple of slides back through the master plan process, not necessarily to like resolve this, issue or to sort of yield the mixed use results immediately, but through the life of the plan, which is like 20, 25 years, how can we kind of set the framework so that the life sciences center can grow and evolve to attract this mixture of uses and also remain economically competitive with other, life sciences clusters in the States. And so I think that like we're trying to do that through a few means, like one, for example, today the Life Sciences Center is capped at 30% residential density for each site. Can we look at that cap and make some changes to it? Can we sort of explore where infill development is possible? For example, there is county and state owned land, quite a bit of it. Are there opportunities for the state and the county to sort of leverage those assets and explore either sort of co-location of the facilities that are there today or relocation of those facilities to, sort of utilize this resource to contribute back to the life sciences industry here with a mixture of uses and housing. We're also seeing, interestingly, that some property owners are indicating that some of the office space that's on their properties is sort of past its useful life. And so, as they think about sort of next investments, they're kind of thinking about like, well, if this is past its useful life, like what comes now? Is it sort of additional housing or a mixture of uses, more in line with the kind of like infill, proximate to life sciences uses category that Ben mentioned. So I'm not sure if that totally, responds to your question, but I think that we're trying to use the information through the study to inform the master plan and set the framework for this environment to happen, through the life of the plan, and again, kind of like remain economically competitive here.
Okay, well, thank you, Jessica and Ben. Jessica, that makes, that does make sense with the county properties, and perhaps if developers are considering some redevelopment, then, I'm a little bit vague on the exact, the specifics of what the 30% limitation really means in practice. But, we can, anyway, it seems like Mitch has his hand up, so I'll yield the floor.
Oh, thanks. I was just going to say it a little bit differently in that I don't think any of this guarantees that anything happens, and I don't think any of us can predict today what happens, but I could tell you the converse, that if we don't change it, it surely won't happen, right? Because I mean, over a 30-year real estate career, you can't catch up to demand cycle. You can't catch up to developers trying to do something different. You sort of need the zoning and the context and the ability to do it in place, and then let people be creative to try to figure it out. And it doesn't guarantee it's going to happen, but if all of that is not in place to begin with, you can guarantee it's not going to happen.
Yeah, well said. We probably should have just said that in the first place instead of our roundabout answers that we gave. But yeah, I think that's, yeah, the framework, it's getting the framework there, and we hope it'll happen. Can't guarantee anything, but at least the framework is there to allow it.
I think the only other question that I saw in the chat was if we can share the slides, and Ben, that's fine, right? We could share the slides.
Yeah, I don't see any problem with that. Well, let me send. Actually, I just don't think that there's a link of them anywhere. But let me send them to you. So, I guess what I will do. I'm trying to think, because I've actually significantly, believe it or not, cut these down from the original slides that the consultant had. I can send the full version of the slides. I can send just what I presented here. Why don't I just send the full version and as PDF, and then you all can do whatever you want to do with them. So I'll drop that in the link in a second, or the chat in a second.
Thanks, Ben.
Sure.
Any final questions before we transition to transportation? No, I don't see any hands or any chats. Phil, does it work for you to transition to the next agenda item?
Please do.
All right. Well, thanks again, Ben. So I'd like to kind of start off this part of the agenda by just mentioning that, I think that, boy, it was probably June where we got together in person, which was fun, and talked through sort of the emerging big ideas for the Great Seneca Plan, including transportation. And we came back to you all in September and talked in a little bit, more greater detail about how those big ideas kind of evolved, and we started to develop the preliminary recommendations. I did want to, I think that in both the meeting that we had in June, the two meetings we had in June, as well as the meeting that we had in September, there was a lot of discussion, a lot of good discussion, and also a lot of questions about sort of what is the level of analysis that's completed to support the recommendations that are developed. And, I think we responded at the time and said, we're doing analysis. We can come back and share that with you once it's complete. And now it is complete. And so we wanted to come back to you all tonight and share with you what the analysis was that was completed, and kind of the motivation behind the recommendations that we have, and then kind of just high level overview of those recommendations, since you have heard about them a few times now. And I think I just want to sort of acknowledge too that I kind of mentioned at the beginning that we'll be presenting the working draft to the planning board on Thursday, and then we'll have hopefully a public hearing in mid-March that will be sort of scheduled by the planning board. Where we go from there, though, is after the public hearing, the planning board and staff then enter into a series of work sessions. And you might all be familiar with this, given your involvement in the planning process for several years now. But we do enter into these work sessions with the planning board where we sort of go, topic by topic through issues and concerns and testimony that is raised through the public hearing. And the planning board then makes edits to the plan, and that document, sort of at the end of the day, that has all of the planning board's edits, is transmitted to the county council as the planning board draft. And then we kind of start the process again with the council. So this is by no means kind of, the final. We're kind of at the beginning of the process, believe it or not. And so this is sort of staff saying, these are our recommendations, planning board. Planning board then takes those recommendations, hears from the community, from stakeholders, from property owners, refines the recommendations, and then sends them to council for their review and consideration. So with that kind of process-related introduction, I'd like to introduce Alex Rixey, who I think you've all met before. He's our transportation planner for the Mid-County Master Plan team, and also the lead transportation planner for the Great Seneca Plan. So thanks for being here tonight, Alex.
Thanks, Jessica. Yeah, let me share my presentation. And just like Ben said, I won't be able to see the chat, but feel free to interrupt if you have questions, or if somebody wants to read those out, I'm happy to answer those too. Sorry, trying to get my screen shared here. Is everybody seeing the transportation overview slide? Great. Okay. Great. So yeah, just want to give a quick overview, as Jessica was saying, of I kind of want to go back to the foundations for just a few slides of the motivations behind the recommendations that you've seen. As Jessica mentioned, those haven't changed significantly from the big ideas and the preliminary recommendations that you've already seen, but I will also kind of recap them from a kind of summary stats perspective, so you get a sense of the kinds of things that we'll be taking to the board on Thursday. And then I really want to dive into the transportation analysis. And I will say here too that there's a lot of additional analysis that went into the existing conditions, especially as it relates to pedestrian crossing spacing and pedestrian comfort and bicycle accessibility and a whole host of things that we're considering in developing these recommendations. I won't go into detail on those. I think a lot of the questions were about sort of the performance metrics of our analysis of the plan and some additional questions about traffic and how that might play out with the plan recommendations. So I'll emphasize those two topics. And then in the email that Jessica sent on Friday, there were links to the plan draft and the transportation appendix, which is also linked here. And my presentation pretty much follows that transportation appendix. So if you want to get more detail, that resource is available as well. And I'm also happy to answer questions here. So starting with the big motivation, Thrive Montgomery 2050 is our new, not so new anymore, but our general plan that was recently adopted. And there were three kind of top line transportation policy guidance points that are informing our recommendations. The first one, to develop a safe, comfortable, and appealing network for walking, biking, and rolling. The second, to build a fast, frequent, convenient, reliable, safe, and accessible transit system. And a third, to adapt policies to reflect the economic and environmental costs of driving alone, recognizing car-dependent residents and industries will remain. And that one's a little more opaque than the first two, so I just included a couple of the sub policy points that are informing some of our recommendations. A big one is to stop proposing new 4+ lane roads in master plans, and you'll see that reflected in the recommendations. And then also to give a lower priority to constructing new 4+ lane roads, as well as grade separated interchanges or major road widenings. So that's sort of our top level down master plan guidance. The next thing that I wanted to highlight was complete streets policies, both at the state level. We have a number of state roads in the plan area, as well as at the county level. And I won't read these all, but the point I wanted to emphasize here is that both of these require staff who are planning and designing transportation systems to consider all modes and types of transportation and all users, regardless of age, ability, or mode of transportation. So really thinking about both people driving and passengers in vehicles, and also transit passengers, people who are walking and rolling along our roadways. And then a final major motivation is roadway safety. So this figure shows the crashes between 2015 and 22 in the Life Sciences Center. There were 27 severe injury crashes, and just wanted to note that pedestrian and bicyclists, while they're not the majority of those crashes, they are disproportionately impacted relative to the amount of pedestrian and bicycle travel that's happening versus auto travel, particularly in the Life Sciences Center. And just wanted to share this kind of relationship that I think many people are familiar with between speed and the fatality risk. And I'm highlighting the pedestrian and cyclist curve because there's such a dramatic difference between 20-mile-per-hour speeds when there's a 10% risk of fatality if there's a collision, versus at 35 miles an hour, there's almost a 90% chance that the person struck by a vehicle would suffer a fatality. But this same sort of curve applies to side vehicle collisions and also head-on vehicle collisions or vehicle collisions with a fixed object. And then finally on this topic, I just wanted to highlight the predictive safety assessment that was conducted countywide and was reported in 2022. And the figure on the right shows a lot of the factors that are related to increased risk for crashes. So the lack of bikeways and walkways, the number of lanes for vehicular travel, intersection controls, whether those intersections are signalized or not. The presence or absence of safe frequent crossings, which is a big challenge in our plan area, that there are not safe frequent crossings for pedestrians. Crash risk, of course, increases with the level of activity, both vehicular activity and pedestrian and bicycle activity. And then, as I just showed on the previous slide, the vehicle speeds. And so just a few of the findings that for certain crash types, increasing the number of lanes, either from 2 to 4, or again from 4 to 6, is associated with a 40% increase in certain crash risk. And then increasing the speed limit by either 5 miles an hour or 10 miles an hour is associated with 15 and more than 30% increase in crash risk, respectively. So a lot of our recommendations are related to trying to reduce the roadway speeds and also the number of lanes that both vehicles and pedestrians and bicyclists need to cross in the plan area. So moving then into some of the recommendations and highlighting those, I'm just kind of summarizing these, and then I have some figures that follow. So quite a substantial increase in the number of linear miles of roadways, and that really reflects the build out of a more fine-grained street grid network, so lots of new 2-lane roadways. Overall, a slight decrease in the lane miles of general purpose traffic lanes, and that reflects some of the reductions in the wider roadways, so roadways that might be 6 lanes going to 4 lanes or 4 lanes going to 2 lanes. But again, that's kind of counterbalanced by a much larger increase in the overall linear miles of roadways that are added. And then an increase in the lane miles of total motor vehicle lanes, so including both lanes for general purpose vehicles and dedicated transit lanes. There's about a 9% increase in those miles. That reflects 4.2 new linear miles of dedicated transit lanes, and those are going in each direction, so 8.4 lane miles. And then a really substantial increase in the number of streets that have bike facilities on both sides of the street. There are only about 3% of existing streets that have those comfortable bike facilities, and the plan recommendations would add almost 18 new miles of streets with bike facilities on both sides, so that approximately 90% of streets would have those. So showing some of this graphically, this shows the large increase in the number of linear miles of travelway, again reflecting that more fine-grained street network and lots of more local serving streets. And then you can see the composition of those roads, whereas today most of the roads in the Life Sciences Center are 4 lanes. There's a small section that's 3 lane, but really the vast majority are 4 lanes or even 5 or 6 lanes. And in the recommended proposed condition, many more of those roadways would be 2 lane. And just some example images to sort of show what that character looks like. Great Seneca Highway is 4 lanes, a very wide cross section right now with a wide median. Sam Ike Highway is 6 lanes. And in the proposed condition, we would have more streets that are like Treville Gateway that are 2 lanes and have a more multimodal streetscape and human scale streetscape. And then this is showing now in terms of lane miles. So this is counting each lane along a roadway. This just shows that there's a slight decrease between the tops of the orange bars in the number of lane miles for motor vehicles, sorry, I should say autos. But with the addition of the dedicated transit lanes or the conversion of some of those existing lanes to dedicated transit ways, there's an increase in the overall lane miles of motorized vehicles. And then finally, this is probably the most striking graphic showing the increase in the linear miles of travelway by bike facility type. So under the existing condition, many roads have no bike facility, and then fewer than half of the roads have a bike facility on just one side, and very few have bike facilities on both sides of the street. And with these very wide right-of-ways, that can often be challenging for people to cross the street to access the other side. But under the proposed condition, again, almost 90% of the roadways would have bike facilities on both sides. We're proposing a few shared streets where cyclists would be able to comfortably ride with traffic. And then in a very few cases where there are no adjacent land uses, where that side of the street is really left to green space or open space, in those cases, there might not be a bike facility on that side, and there would only be a bike facility on one side of the street. So with those kind of high-level transportation recommendations summary, I wanted to get into the methods that we're using to evaluate them. And for the transportation system performance metrics, the main tool that we have for doing that is our regional travel demand model, Travel 4. I won't belabor this too much, but just wanted to give a very high level overview of how that works. So Travel 4 is a regional travel demand model that's based on the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, or MWCOG, regional travel demand model, but customized and detailed out a little bit more for Montgomery County. So it provides high-level travel demand forecasts for multiple modes. So the main focus of the model is on auto and somewhat transit travel. It does generate estimates of the amount of active travel. It considers pedestrian and bicycle trips together, so it can't analyze each of those separately, but gives an overall total for active travel. But it makes a generalized assumption that those active trips are happening within the same transportation analysis zone. And so it doesn't give a lot of information about the origins and destinations of those trips, or what routes they take. So it divides the county into pretty large transportation analysis zones, or TAZs. There's a map of those for the county on the right. This is just showing the county, but the model does cover the entire region, all of our surrounding counties, and the District of Columbia. And I just wanted to make the point that these TAZs are pretty large, so they vary in size from about 30 acres to over 12,000 acres. So doesn't give a super granular view of the transportation network, but it does represent a fair amount of the roadway network, with kind of sticks and balls, or links and nodes that connect the centroids, or the center points of the TAZs, to each other. And so with that, we have a pretty high level representation of the transportation network. And then the way the model works is following a 4-step process, and it does iterate through this process a number of times to kind of converge on a solution. But in general, what it's trying to do is understand the trip generation, which is how many trips each land use grouping, or TAZ, creates. Once it has that quantity of travel, it tries to estimate where those trips are being distributed. So where do they start and where do they end in terms of the TAZs? And then based on that need for a trip from one place to another, what mode of travel are people going to use? And so it can differentiate between single occupant autos and multiple occupant autos in the case of carpooling, transit, and then again, walking and biking are combined. And then finally, it assigns those trips. So once you know you're going from one TAZ to another, there might be multiple options for traveling by auto, for example, between the two. And it generally uses a shortest path algorithm that's based on the travel time. So the lowest travel time routes get used between a particular pair. And so the reason for all of that background is that this is the tool that we use for calculating most of our transportation system performance metrics. The 4 that are relying completely on the model are access to jobs and auto by transit, which we look at within a 45-minute trip by each mode, starting from a TAZ. How many total jobs do you have access to during the peak period? The average travel time per trip by auto and transit, and that's based on the modeled trips. So all of those estimated trips from each zone to each other zone, how long would it take on average for those trips to be completed? One number for auto and a different number for transit. Then vehicle miles traveled per capita. Vehicle miles traveled is the total number of miles that that vehicles are traveling to complete the travel needs for the county. The number of people who are making those trips, and employees, the resident on the home end of the trip and the employee on the work end of the trip, if it's a work-based trip. And then non-auto driver mode share is the percent of trips that are taken by each of the modes, except for drive alone. So if you're an auto passenger in a vehicle with multiple people, that counts as non-auto driver. Transit passengers, people walking and biking. And then the final metric that we calculate, supported by the model, so we use the Travel 4 model to estimate that amount of active travel, and then the countywide planning division has an additional tool to estimate the approximate number of demand for bicycle trips, and then uses the bicycle level of traffic stress network, which is a measure of how comfortable a particular roadway is for people traveling by bicycle. And it estimates the number of those trips, or the percent, I guess I should say, the percent of those trips that are accessible by a low stress facility. So moving to the results of those analyses, I'm sorry, I guess I should say that the comparison that we make is between our plan recommendations and the previously adopted plan genre for the whole county. So mainly what's important here is the previously adopted 2010 plan for Great Seneca, but all of the other updated plans are taken into account as well. So for this current plan relative to what would happen if we did not adopt this plan, we would estimate that within the plan area, there would be access to 1% more jobs within a 45-minute trip by auto and 9% more jobs within a 45-minute trip by transit. So really expanding the access to jobs there. For the next two, the travel times are getting slightly longer. So there would be 1 minute longer for the average auto trip, increasing from 23 to 24 minutes, and 1 minute longer for the average transit trip, increasing from 52 to 53 minutes. There would be 3% fewer vehicle miles traveled per person, and travelers would shift 1% of their total travel to the non-auto driver modes. So instead of a 28% non-auto driver mode share, it would increase to 29. And then finally, the low stress bicycle accessibility metric is still being calculated, but it's pretty clear that that should improve based on the recommendations that I shared a moment ago, just a large increase in the recommended bicycle facilities. And then the other thing that that accessibility calculation takes into account is how land use is situated around those facilities. And we're both increasing the number of low stress bicycle facilities and also locating development near those facilities. And so a bit of discussion. So as I just went through, 4 of those 5 adequacy metrics are going in the direction that we want them to achieve transportation adequacy when the plan is built out. But as it's currently defined, the auto and transit travel time metrics do not achieve transportation adequacy because they increase the travel time by 1 minute for each mode. So I just wanted to frame for perspective that those travel times are not necessarily saying that it'll take longer to get from the same point A to the same point B in both of the scenarios, because people change their travel behavior when they're presented with new opportunities. So some of that might be reflecting an increase in employment opportunities in the Life Sciences Center or new housing in the Life Sciences Center, that those people are then trying to reach jobs or shopping or recreational trips, and might be choosing to travel to different destinations than they were previously. And then the other point that I want to make there, and this is something that the board and ultimately the council will have to consider, is that the travel times, as I mentioned, are estimated for our current plan proposal and compared against the previously adopted plan. And the previously adopted plan included a number of recommendations that are now inconsistent with the Thrive Montgomery 2050 policies that I pointed to earlier, particularly the one about giving a lower priority to new 4+ lane roads, a lower priority to grade separated interchanges, and major road widenings. And so the previous plan, or the current plan, had recommended 4 additional grade separated interchanges, and those are at surface roadways, so not with 270, but within the plan area itself. 1 additional freeway interchange at 270, a widening of Key West Avenue from 6 to 8 lanes, and widening of Great Seneca Highway and Darnestown Road from either 3 or 4 lanes to 6 lanes. So quite a bit of additional roadway capacity needed to reduce those travel times by 1 minute relative to the recommendations that we're making now. And then these, we did some additional analysis of vehicular traffic. This is not required for transportation master plan adequacy, but we wanted to understand the implications of some of the recommendations that we're making, particularly around reallocating travel lanes. And so we collected some turning movement counts in the spring of 2023 at intersections around the plan area. We ran the regional travel demand model using the travel 4 model I just highlighted. And then we combined those 2 pieces of information. So we used the growth for the peak period model results and applied that to the existing peak hour counts to estimate peak hour volumes on the roadways, on the links in the model. And we did that on a per lane per hour basis during the peak hour. And I just wanted to note also that there was no additional modification or rerouting of those trips. Sometimes when we run the model, we find that it's not assigning trips to certain routes, and we manually adjust to more accurately represent what we think people's travel patterns would be. But the results I'm going to show don't reflect that.
And Alex,
Hey,
just want to raise that Mark has a question.
Oh, sure.
Yeah,
Mark, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I just wanted to make sure I understood this slide or the implications of this slide. So the numbers you gave before didn't factor in rush hour, or it just lumped it all together with, the traffic at 2 a.m. basically.
Yeah, to some extent, yeah, let me clarify because some of them do and some of them don't. So the access to jobs measure does use the peak period travel time, so that does account for congestion. The travel times, the third and fourth sub-bullets are based on all-day travel for all different trips. So yes, that could be at noon, that could be at midnight. Much more of the traffic is happening during the day than late at night, but it reflects all of those times. And the other two metrics are all day as well. So the vehicle miles traveled is the total all day for all purposes. And the non-auto driver mode share values are for commute trips. So to the extent that most of them take place during the peak period, those would reflect that, but they don't necessarily. So some of those could be off peak.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
It does, and I guess then when you pop back to the slide you're on before, then I appreciate you guys looking at that, and that's part of what I'm more interested in, because I'm not taking my kids to school at 10 in the morning, right? I'm taking them at 8 o'clock when everybody's going to work, and I think that's where you're going to see the bigger impact. And kind of almost a little bit, it's only 1 minute longer, but you're smoothing out the peaks and valleys by looking at the whole thing, whereas I can't not take my kids to school at 8 in the morning, so I'm stuck in that. So I'd just like to see a little more, and maybe you do this later, attention paid to the peak periods.
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for that comment, because that does make a lot of sense, and that's when a lot of people experience the congestion is during the peak hour. So and yes, I'm about to present some of those results. So that's why we did want to go beyond the metrics that are required as part of the process to understand what that experience is like. So I'll go ahead and jump into that. So just a little framing for how to interpret the results that I'm about to show. So again, we broke down the volumes on the roadways to the number of vehicles per hour per lane that the roadways are that are traveling along the roadways, and there's no single threshold for this in terms of when a road becomes congested, but segments that exceed 900 or 1,000 vehicles per hour per lane would be approaching congested conditions. To be conservative, we set the threshold at 800 vehicles per hour per lane for places that are approaching congested conditions. But I also want to provide some context that throughout Montgomery County, there are places where values exceed 1,100 vehicles per hour per lane. As part of the 2013 Countywide Transit Corridors Functional Master Plan, they looked at a comparison of potential capacities for dedicated transit lanes versus the throughput capacity that the general purpose vehicle lanes were showing, and found several locations, 10 of them that I found, but there are probably other examples that have volumes ranging between 1,100 vehicles per hour per lane and up to 1,550 vehicles per hour per lane. So just because these are approaching congested conditions doesn't mean that that the roadway would totally break down or wouldn't function. There are examples where that would work. So with all of that said, these figures on the screen now kind of change from green to orange and then red at that 800 mark. And using that as the threshold, either in the AM peak, and I should be clear, this is for the peak hour. So the model provides peak period, which is either a 3-hour or 4-hour peak, because not every commute trip happens exactly at 5 p.m. But this analysis used the very peak of observed conditions. So we took counts in 15-minute increments, and for each location, whatever the 4 continuous 15-minute periods are that are the most congested. So at one location, it could be 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. At another location, it could be 5:15 to 6:15 p.m. Whatever it is, we took the value that had the highest hourly volume. So for how that all played out, either in the AM or the PM peak hour, about 3% of the locations, is the one shown in red and orange, would be under those congested or approaching congested conditions. And most of the locations in the area would continue to be uncongested throughout the day. And then I just wanted to provide a little more context and discussion of these results. Again, so all of this is done with the regional travel demand model. That's, oh, sorry, I see a hand up. Is that Phil?
Yeah, thanks. I guess this is a topic we've discussed before a little bit, but it appears like one of the limitations of your study is that it's really focused on the plan area and not terribly focused on the surrounding areas and the impact to the surrounding areas. So, I mean, obviously, many of the drives that are, that are service this area are going to be fed by Samig and 270 and and 28 in Rockville outside of the plan area and things like that. And so I'm curious if your study does in fact address the impacts on those surrounding areas as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's another good distinction between these, sorry, where's my mouse here? The systemic, the transportation system performance metrics that I shared, these all do, to the extent that people are traveling from the plan area to other places, these take those into account. So within 45 minutes from the Life Sciences Center, and I should say that this includes areas outside of the Life Sciences Center, this is the entire Great Seneca Plan area. This looks at each one of those traffic or transportation analysis zones and all of the places that they can reach within 45 minutes. So to the extent that it's affecting travel on other roadways, that's taken into account here. All of these metrics are not limited to the plan boundary, but take into account that entire trip.
Yeah, so I have a question that relates to that, Alex. Thank you for your presentation.
Sure.
Your network, so the network that was done 10 years ago is very different. The analysis done was then 10 years ago or longer, had the ICC, had those 4 interchanges, had widening of roads. And the network that you're using for the current analysis, I think probably includes what's in the constrained long range plan, which includes the improvements to 270, the express toll lanes, the 4 lanes additional there, probably an interchange with Goody, and a whole bunch of other improvements, but not probably, and the ICC may or may not, is it the current plan still has the ICC in it. So, I mean, you have to kind of put it in the balance of what else is changing in the network that may or may not be in the future. I mean, yes, you did everything that you were supposed to do because you have to take on the networks that are currently in the current plans, but it's not likely that we're going to see anytime soon, particularly now that the American Legion Bridge is not going to be funded. Currently, we're not going to see those improvements to 270 for quite some time, and we're not going to see necessarily a lot of the transit improvements that went along with that. But anyway, I think I just want to put in the perspective that what's in your network. Can you maybe go in a little more detail about the differences in the networks? Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great point, and thanks for that question, Gary. So, yeah, without getting into too much gory detail, I do want to make the point that you raised the question of like 270, for example, or the ICC. So this is not just a comparison of looking back at what's on paper from the old plan and comparing those results against these results. We did new analysis for both our proposed recommendation scenario and then the adopted plan scenario. And so the only difference in the network between the two is the recommendations that we're making right now. So all of the background transportation assumptions, including 270 or that the ICC has been built now that you were describing, those are consistent between the 2010 plan analysis scenario and our current proposed recommendations.
Right. That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, you're
So
welcome.
this gives you a better apples to apples analysis.
Okay. And then just a few more points on the discussion, and feel free to ask additional questions. So some of the limitations in what we're doing, this is, to the extent that we are showing congestion in some of these locations, the model is not foolproof. And if we could precisely predict the future, I think we might all be a lot better off. But unfortunately, we can't. And national research indicates that some of these major roadway volumes in general throughout the country could be varying by more than 40%. So could be overestimating in some cases and underestimating in others. That's just kind of a standard caveat. In particular, in the analysis approach that we took to converting the peak period model factors, the model doesn't get down to that very highest sequence of 4 15-minute periods like our counts do. So when we're converting from the peak period model factors to the peak hour observed data, there are some technical issues there that could result in an overestimation of those volumes. So in that sense, I think our analysis is conservative. And then just some human behavior considerations, that travelers in real life tend to spread out their trips when they're faced with congested conditions. So certainly school pickup and drop off tends to be pretty fixed and doesn't vary. But with things like commutes, if people have slightly more flexible schedules, or if they're making discretionary trips, they might tend to shift those slightly earlier, slightly later to avoid congestion. The model does not take that into account. It doesn't have a dynamic traffic assignment approach, and it uses those entire peak periods of either 3 hours or 4 hours, depending on the period. So it doesn't take that into account. There were a number of uncongested routes that are available for access to and circulation within the Life Sciences Center, and I'll just flip back to the slide. So we see some of these more congested locations along Shady Grove Road, for example, or coming in on Great Seneca. And the point I wanted to make here is that the model is not seeing fit to assign trips on the Omega Drive off ramp, for example, to come in Omega Drive, or even on Sam Ike Highway to come down through Diamondback into Coverly into the core of the Life Sciences Center. So there are alternative routes that this is a little bit of a technical piece of the model as well, but it does an all or nothing assignment. And so for each given transportation analysis zone pair, it looks for that particular decision, which is the fastest way to go, and it assigns all of that to a particular route. So it can be a little bit lumpy in the way that it assigns trips, and real travelers over multiple days and weeks of experience driving on this network might find, oh, hey, there's a quicker way to get here. I can go by Omega Drive when I'm coming to Shady Grove Adventist Medical Center, for example, and instead of sitting on one of the congested routes, could use that instead. So just want to make the point that there are some of those alternatives that could help to alleviate some of this congestion. And then the final point is that the model doesn't account for some of the emerging non-traditional behavior trends, things like more telework, more flexible work schedules. And one of the things we heard about the life sciences industry is that while people do tend to be more in person and that they're doing, wet lab work or bench work that they need to be there for, they tend to also have less traditional shifts. So maybe not all of that is happening during the peak of peak hour. So I think with that, that's the last piece I have. I'm happy to answer questions and look forward to discussion.
Yeah, this is Mark Prater again. I've got another question. It's on the last point you made, or second to last, I guess, on kind of spreading the traffic out into these different underutilized roads. It's like the Waze effect, right? They have those issues down in Chevy Chase, I think it was, where Waze was taking people off of the main roads and putting them on these residential streets, to the great chagrin of the people who lived on these residential streets. So if we're going to do a lot of mixed use development, so you're going to have a lot of houses, I think of the new townhouses and development that's going in, where the old, I forget what it was, the old police and fire training center was. If people start using the streets in there to commute, to bypass a smaller Key West or a smaller Darnestown because we've limited the number of lanes on that. Is that a win? I mean, that seems like a loss to me.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think to some extent there's sort of a balance there in that those I don't think we want to see, or I don't think we would see trips moving fully through the plan area on some of those roadways. I think it's more about the local access. So there might be, yes, there might be people traveling into kind of the core of the life sciences center that would turn on to some of those roads, and many of those people might be the people who live in, as you're saying, that the PSTA, the Public Service Training Academy, Elms site. So yeah, I think there is a bit of a balance in that those roads will also be smaller still than Key West or Great Seneca and have lower target speeds. So I don't think they'll be more appealing for longer distance travel, but I think might be more appealing for some of the local access trips that otherwise would have to all filter out to the larger roadways and then filter back down to the smaller roadways.
Yeah, thanks.
Sure.
Other questions? Any, and also this is, I feel like I've been working in planning for a little while now, and I think I'm starting to get my, arms around some of the transportation terms, but if there's anything that you guys feel like it'd be helpful to kind of like drill down in, or, better define, like, please don't hesitate to ask. I feel like I ask a lot of questions on transportation, so don't be shy. And if you do have any questions or comments, let us know. No? Okay. Well, thanks so much. So I guess in terms of next steps, and I'm just kind of pulling up the agenda again. We will be, as I mentioned, presenting the working draft to the planning board on Thursday. And our ask to them is to accept the working draft as the public hearing draft, which we would then post on our website, and also distribute to local libraries, to the county executive, and to the council, and certainly share a link to that with all of you. We'd encourage you all to participate in the public hearing, and I think, Phil, a question for you all might be, if you feel inclined to share a letter or of testimony, or to testify in person or online on behalf of the committee, or if you all would want to do something individually. I think that's a question for you all to think through, but we'd love to have your participation in the public hearing once it's set. And we are asking the planning board that if they do approve the working draft as the public hearing draft, to set that public hearing for mid-March. So there's still some time on that, but wanted to make sure that we're flagging next steps for you all. Any questions on that, on the process, or anything that we can answer at this time?
Jessica, I'm sorry. Yeah. I think it's a reasonable question to say, to see if the committee wants to take any stance on, at the end of the day, you're submitting, let me just clarify where the stage we're at again is, you're submitting plan recommendations to the to the planning board, and you want the planning board to sign off on those for purpose of for purposes of public hearings. Is that what you were saying?
Yes. So I guess one thing I would sort of add to that is what we've done is sort of taken those recommendations that we've talked about over the last few months and paired the recommendations with the narrative. So now we have issued a full draft of the plan, and we're asking the planning board to take that draft plan and say, public, here is a version of the plan. We'd like your comments and feedback on it. We'll hold a public hearing to, get those comments either in person, virtually, or in writing. And so I guess, I wanted to sort of share that piece of process with you all, to say that there is an opportunity to sort of formally provide either verbal or written comments to the planning board if the committee would like to do so. And that's coming up in, hopefully this spring.
Right. So I guess now I just want to clarify at this point what we've gone through. We've reviewed big ideas together. We've reviewed some of the more detailed recommendations that came out of that. And are you saying that at this point the staff has progressed that to the point where there is a full revision to the plan that is being reviewed, or is it still plan recommendations? Modification, recommendations on modifications to the plan, but not a full revision to the plan at this point in time? Or am I making a distinction without a difference?
There is a full draft plan.
There's a full draft plan
now.
that will be the replacement master plan for the 2010 master plan.
That is correct. Yes.
That incorporates all of the recommendations that we have discussed as a committee.
Yes, exactly. Yep. And I sent a link to that to the group on Friday, and I also dropped a link to the draft plan in the chat for this evening. So, by no means should everyone have like reviewed that whole thing. As of tonight, it's a lot. But we do have it available both in the email and the chat for tonight, as well as on our website. So, and if anyone has any trouble accessing it or downloading it, certainly reach out to us and we can make sure that we get you a link that works that you can access the draft plan.
And so you're going to be presenting again, sorry, I'm being a bit thick here, but we're going to be taking the full draft plan. We're going to be presenting it to the planning board with the intent of using the full draft plan for public comment in March timeframe, public hearings. Is that is that accurate?
Yeah, there's a little, there's like this bureaucratic process with these specific terms that we use. That's in a nutshell, yes. The draft that we're presenting to the planning board on Thursday was at a time called the staff draft, and we now call it the working draft. And the reason that we sort of have the public hearing draft is when we present the draft plan to the planning board on Thursday, they could say, before we post this for public hearing, we want you to make these changes to the draft plan. And so there's the potential that on Thursday they could provide that direction to staff, and that we would then need to go back and revise the plan, and then have that revised version posted as the public hearing draft. So, I think that in the past that has happened. I would say more recently, the planning board leans on the sort of side of we can discuss additional things during the work sessions, and has in recent past really just posted the staff draft as the public hearing draft.
Right.
Does that help?
That is helpful. So there is an expectation that you'll have ongoing work sessions, as you said, with the planning board, providing additional comment and feedback towards a final approval of the draft, the draft plan. Do I have that right?
Yes, that's correct. After the public hearing, we then have work sessions with the planning board where we go through the public testimony that was received, as well as sort of, topic areas. So that might be that there's a session on land use and zoning. It might mean that there's a session on transportation where we cover the recommendations, the testimony that was received, and we request kind of guidance from the planning board on how they would like to amend the plan to ultimately create what is called a planning board draft, and that is what is then transmitted to the council. We also have a sort of flow chart that outlines this whole process, and I could share that with you all if it would be helpful to kind of walk through the process, because it is a lot, and they're all the draft plan, so it's kind of confusing.
Sure. Well, that can't hurt. That would be great. So with that said, what is the time frame for, that you would expect to go from, public review through working, working sessions with the planning board to the planning board draft?
Sure, that's a good question. We are, as of right now, if we have a public hearing in mid-March, we would anticipate that we would start the work sessions, late March, and then, have work sessions all through April. The work sessions typically would occur on Thursdays at the planning board's regularly scheduled meetings. And so we would anticipate work sessions primarily in late March and throughout April, and would anticipate a planning board draft in May.
Okay, so May timeframe to get to planning board. And obviously, I'm asking these questions both as informational for the committee and myself, but also as a prelude to the question for the committee my comment on your question, which was, is the committee, is the committee prepared or interested in taking both or either a position as a committee on the current recommendations and/or draft, or perhaps as individuals. Obviously, we always have the opportunity to do that. And I guess I would say that as a committee, it would seem premature, or difficult for us to comment on something which I doubt most of us have reviewed in detail. I know I have not. So I wouldn't suggest us trying to take a position as a committee on the draft that you've provided a link to at this point. So the question I would have for the committee is, do we, it doesn't seem like there's any urgency as of today for us to provide any immediate inputs either into the planning board staff or to the planning board itself as a committee about the draft, but that we kind of have a timeline of either March, the end of late February, call it late February, if we want our commentary included in what will ultimately be the public, the public draft, right? Release the public draft, or obviously we have until a continuing process through work sessions, whatever, to we have quite a while to provide inputs at various stages along the way. I would suggest that perhaps what we might want to do is use a meeting next month for the purpose of the committee coming, perhaps doing a high level review of I mean, I don't believe it's feasible or desirable for us to walk through the draft document. I think we've already gone through much of the content of the document in the form of recommendations and presentations and stuff like that. But perhaps there is a need for the committee to review as kind of take away work, review the plan, and come back together and see if we have any individual commentary we want to discuss, or questions that we want to discuss with the staff, or if we want to come together as a committee to offer any commentary on the draft prior to the public presentation. So, I mean, we would normally be scheduled for a late February meeting or a third week of February Tuesday meeting anyway. Perhaps we can come together as a committee and discuss the planning board draft at that point in time, is I guess what I'm throwing out there. So Jessica, your thoughts on that before we put it to a committee discussion or vote around that?
I mean, we'd be happy to sort of answer any questions that you all have as you review the draft. I think it's sort of at the discretion of the committee how you all would like to proceed, but we're certainly here to help support you as you review the draft plan.
So if is third week of February, if the committee were to provide to take an official position on the plan, is that enough time for you to incorporate into discussion with the planning board and to any public, I mean, obviously we count as somewhat, privileged public comment at the end of the day, right? So I guess there's not necessarily an expectation that you would alter the draft prior to the public presentation, but it might inform some of the, some of the how you approach a public presentation, perhaps.
So I guess just to clarify, any sort of letter that you all would prepare would be something that we would ask you to share with the planning board
Yes.
as part of the public hearing. And so there wouldn't be like amendments between the public hearing to incorporate changes that the committee recommends. Those
Sure.
kind of edits would then become part of the discussion with the planning board during the work sessions.
Right. So I think we're kind of saying the same thing. I just wanted to, yeah, I think you're clarifying what I did a poor job of stating, which is, yeah, I mean, our comments, while they are, again, somewhat privileged, they have a slightly different status than, perhaps some of the public comment. If we were to, come back as a committee, nonetheless, they will be part of the public comment period, and they will be considered by the planning board as part of the public comment feedback. So, yes, right? Fair. Is that a fair way of putting it? Yes. Okay. So again, with that said, I guess to the committee, I guess I'll, ask if folks are on board with having some takeaway work to review the plan and be prepared for a third week of February, third Tuesday of February. I think that's our normal cadence anyway. Is it not? Third Tuesday of the month. So third Tuesday of the month. Meeting where we would discuss, ask questions of the planning staff, and decide as a committee if we would like to provide a uniform comment. I mean, the most common thing we have done in the past, for those of you that are newer to the committee, is we've often affirmed our support for the, what the planning staff has presented, but we have also offered various comments that we were had consensus on, and so committee members, can we take a quick, do we have any nays against a third week of February meeting with the expectation that you're going to do some homework and be prepared to discuss the draft at that time with the committee and the planning board? I'm not going to vote for yeses because it's too hard virtual. So any nays? Okay, so it seems like, Jessica, that seems like kind of the plan of record, third Tuesday again. And am I correct? Third Tuesday of the month is our normal cadence for the meetings. Is that right?
Seems like we've been doing the last Tuesday, but
And in February, that may be the third Tuesday. Let's look at the date now. Let me find my calendar. All right, so the third Tuesday of February. Let's see, I'm not there yet. So that the third Tuesday would be, yeah, that is the second to last Tuesday. So the 20th, but Mark, you're saying we've usually been doing that would be the 27th for the last Tuesday. I don't have a particular preference. So if the last Tuesday is what we've been doing, then I guess it would be the 27th is what we would target. So any comments on that? Okay, so planning board staff are, Jessica, Steve, et cetera. Is that something you would be able to, again, it seems like, what I'm proposing is a fairly open-ended discussion centered around the content of the of the draft. I'm not necessarily suggesting that you should prepare anything, but if you feel that there might be value in some sort of summary presentation that you're already going to have prepared for other contexts or venues, which you probably have, there might be value in having a brief walkthrough of something like that to help structure the conversation. Anyway, you can consider that. Otherwise, I'll come prepared to, to at least, have the structure of the document in my head and, help the committee to walk through piece by piece and, shepherd along some discussion. That seems like the straightforward way to do it.
Phil, I mean, that makes sense, and we will, have a presentation, that we make to the planning board on Thursday. There wouldn't be, unless the planning board makes changes on Thursday, there wouldn't be sort of changes from what we share with the board. So one avenue could be that the committee members could sort of watch that or listen to that presentation on demand as their schedule permits, or review the plan, or we can come back and be prepared to go through a presentation. If there are kind of, as folks are going through the plan, if there are questions that could be shared in advance with us, that would certainly be helpful. But, if the committee wants to kind of reconvene at the end of February and have more of an open discussion, and then we're sort of there to respond to any questions that the committee might have, that's, we can certainly do that.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, it would be helpful, Jessica, if you could, once that presentation is finalized and presented to the planning board, if you could distribute it to the committee, that would be most helpful. And then, whether if folks have time to watch or listen, that's their business. But there is, again, there is an ask and expectation that, the committee members would review both the draft and that presentation, the draft plan and that presentation, so that we could have a productive discussion. And yeah, if anybody has any questions in advance, that can be proffered in advance for the planning staff. I'm sure that would help the planning staff to not be caught flat-footed, with what's, I'm sure, an extensive and, broad and deep document, needing to know every detail. But yeah, I mean, I think there is an ask, Jessica, for you guys that be prepared to answer some questions on the fly as well. And I'm sure I have confidence, we have confidence in your ability to do so. So, yeah.
And it's good practice for us.
There you go.
Yeah. One thing just to mention real quick, the life science or the Great Seneca Plan covers a lot of areas, including the Life Sciences Center, but also Londonderry, Quince Orchard, Oakmont, Walnut Hill, Rosemont. So, I think that it's safe to say that you all should focus on the Life Sciences Center chapter. So it's not the full document for you all, which I'm sure will come as a relief as you dig into the plan.
Great. Okay, so tentatively, I mean, February 27th, and with the plan reviewed, with the the presentation that the planning staff will have presented to the planning board in advance, to, as an organizing principle, and then Jessica and and planning staff, I'll coordinate with you in advance of the meeting to ensure we're that we have a clear way to walk through this and help organize the discussion, and that's all. All right, so I guess I'll open the floor up. Would any of the committee like to add any comment or notes or anything to the proposed plan before we call it done and close out the meeting? Great. Well, then don't want to, keep anybody dramatically longer than our 9 o'clock target, which we're at. So I guess, I'll motion to close the meeting, and if I have a second, then we'll see if there are any objections.
I second.
Great. So I guess we're done then. thank you all, and we'll talk on February 27th. And obviously, planning staff, and if, I'm always, if any questions about the meetings or whatever are available. So thanks. Good night.
All right, thank you. Good night.
And thank you, planning staff. Thanks,
Thank you,
Alex.
everybody.
Great
Good night.
presentation.
Well,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.